I'm certainly not the first to ask how God is defined. The issue would have much less importance to me if I were not a 2-decade employee at a Jesuit university. However, I have been at Regis for 20 years, and I sincerely remain puzzled by his apparent omnipresence. Let me be clear, I am parsecs away from being an authority in either theology or astrophysics. The older I become, the less I seem to know, except that I'm better at asking questions about the unknown. I recall the exhausting interview process at Regis University. It was fall of 2000. I had been reasonably competent in the healthcare business world and well into my doctoral studies in business administration. One of my classmates was an administrator at Regis, and while searching for his contact information, I came across an MBA faculty job posting. My first faculty position, and at a Catholic university? And I'm a secular Jew? Well, I applied, and subsequently survived the dozen or so interviews over the next couple of months. Intimidation set in prior to my first day, January 2nd, 2001, fueled moderately by my lack of confidence to be faculty, and more so by my lack of familiarity with anything Catholic. I was taught as a youngster there were just two religions, just Jews and Gentiles. Either you were Jewish or you were not. My hiring launched the nagging question resonating to this day. Why would a Catholic university hire a non-practicing Jew to influence the minds of impressionable students? It just didn't make sense. And never once during the many interviews was the topic of my spirituality ever broached. I prepared zealously for my interviews, reviewing every bit of accessible information about Regis University, Jesuit pedagogy, and Ignatian values. The result was to remain quiet about my lack of belief in an intelligent creator, focusing instead on honing my teaching and advising skills. Anyway, whom was I to doubt the wisdom of a 120-year-old Jesuit university based on a 450-year-old teaching paradigm? Well, I was, and I continue to be. My first doubts about organized religion stem from a chance encounter roasting marshmallows at age 14. It was around a campfire during a weekend retreat organized by the United Hebrew congregation. United Hebrew was a Reformed temple in St. Louis. My paternal grandparents were Orthodox Jews. I recall attending shul with my grandfather, along with many other elderly men, all dressed in black, as they were rocking or shuckling back and forth, and side to side while praying or davening. I was convinced as a preschooler that this was Judaism, pure and simple. My mother's parents were conservative Jews, not quite Orthodox, though they still obeyed kosher rules, or kashrut, while closely observing the high holy days and Passover. My parents were Reformed Jews, the least observant of the three movements. And that brings me back to roasting marshmallows. I asked the assistant rabbi seated next to me why there were Orthodox, conservative, and Reformed Jews. I found his response unpersuasive that different families had different beliefs. It was clear to me that Reformed Judaism existed only to pander to those who did not adhere to the traditional ideals and was promoted only to financially exploit casual believers. My disdain that this distorted impression corrupted a 5,000-year-old tradition set the foundation for my spiritual development from that point forward. I subsequently discovered that about 50% of Jews consider themselves secular. That's interesting, considering Jews comprise only 0.2% of the worldwide population, leaving only a few more than 7 million religious Jews worldwide. This provided additional affirmation, knowing that I can be culturally Jewish without being religious. Searching for clarity, a couple of friends in high school introduced me to the concept of agnosticism. At the time, it seemed reasonable to assume the existence of God could not be clearly demonstrated. I wasn't comfortable claiming to be an atheist, primarily because I was unable to identify a common thread about how others defined God. How could I be a non-believer if I did not know how to define belief? My family moved from the relatively conservative Midwest to a more progressive San Francisco Bay Area after my sophomore year, where I found a broader acceptance of secular thought both in my final 2 years of high school and as I entered college as a biology major. A professor at San Francisco State University required his book, Biochemical Predestination, for class. His text and others, arguing on behalf of physical law, laid an important foundation for the further development about how I view the universe. Life is a consequence of random biochemical processes consistent with physical law. Questioning the wisdom of the textbook, I was alerted during this project's review process that the author of Biochemical Predestination, Dr. Dean Kenyon, changed his philosophy considerably from chemical evolution to intelligent design. A 180-degree change. Again, I am not qualified as a physicist or a biochemist. I adopt and aggregate those concepts appearing rational as a layperson and not as an expert. That stated, Kenyon's change of his fundamental approach appears to be his intimidation of the complexity of life at its basis. I contend that it is ignorance and not absurdity, that all that exists has its origins in random physical and chemical processes. I dabbled superficially in novel religious movements as an undergrad student, nothing too serious. Just some meetings with various groups popular in 1970s San Francisco, many of which ramped up quickly and disbanded just as quickly. None made sense to me. All appeared to be vehicles to separate vulnerable young adults from their worldly possessions and demanding absolute commitment. Some may refer to these as cults. All appeared to be shams. It occurred to me that the singular difference between an established religion and a cult is the major religion's sustained business model.